65-year-old Lung Yu Tim can count nearly all of his possessions on his bedside shelf. These biscuits, he says, are a luxury. Of all the items here, though, the most important are his welfare documents. Illness forced him to stop work last year, and he now relies on about $900 a month. It doesn't go far when a third is spent on renting the few dozen square feet he calls home, barely enough to fit a bunk bed. Lung does have at least a share of the communal kitchen and bathroom, though, along with 8 others. Not everything works here, but that's the least of his problems.
Before 1997, I lived in a flat in Causeway Bay that was much bigger than this flat and even had its own bathroom, and the rent was just slightly higher. Here I have this room without windows, which can get very stuffy, and the temperature in here is higher than out on the streets.
Space really is Hong Kong's final frontier. With around 7.5 million people living here, it's the 4th most densely populated place in the world. According to official data, here in Kwun Tong district, there's almost 60 people for every square metre of space. While the perception of Hong Kong might be one of wealth and enterprise, the reality, according to some lawmakers, is that many here are being left behind.
Our livelihood, our living standard is deteriorating with a very ever-rising higher property prices. So we are not sharing in the prosperity, but we are paying our price with long working hours, with our family, with our social life that are being, all being eroded by long working hours.
Absolute poverty in Hong Kong often contrasts with absolute wealth. A short walk along Davao Road in Central District is all you need to see the playthings of the rich. The wealthiest households here now earn a staggering 44 times what the poorest earn, while Hong Kong's lack of regulation is held up elsewhere as a global model of small government. It doesn't work for everybody.
So we are, left to the mercy of the capitalists. We don't have the right to collective bargaining, and there are no working hours regulation. So there's nothing at all that the workers can have a legal backup in getting a higher wages or a more reasonable working hours.
July the 1st marks 20 years since Hong Kong was handed back to China. In that time, the region has suffered 3 financial crises. 1 million people now live in poverty. Lung Yu Tim isn't worried by what's changed in the last 2 decades, only whether things will ever change for the better. Joel Flynn, TRT World, Hong Kong.
Joining me now from London is Martin Jacques. He's the author of When China Rules the World. Martin, thank you ever so much for joining us on Money Talks. Great to have you with us. You've written about how China places an enormous emphasis on unity. Is Hong Kong's status of one country, 2 systems a thorn in the side of Beijing, or is it something else?
Oh, I think that this formula, which the Chinese decided on for the relationship with Hong Kong at the time of the handover, is very Chinese, actually. It comes from Chinese history. It's such a huge country. It can't be governed in the same way as a fairly, the average nation state, even a large one. Right. And so this idea of allowing 2 systems to exist was very important, I think. And I think it was a very innovative and good solution, actually. But of course, it's clear that there are a lot of problems in Hong Kong, right.
So let me just jump in there for a second there, Martin. So do you think that one country, 2 systems, in terms of the economy, has been good for Hong Kong, or would it have been better off still under British rule, do you think?
Well, there's no way it would have been better off under British rule. Look, Hong Kong, in the 20 years or so prior to the handover, did very well for one main reason, and that was China was opening up, but not opening up fully. And Hong Kong became, as it were, the front office of China. But once China opened up fully, after joining the WTO in 2001, really the situation of Hong Kong, it no longer had that privilege. So it had to adapt. Britain is irrelevant to this question because Hong Kong sits, just south of China. And so Hong Kong's future is absolutely bound up with its economic relationship with China.
Right. I'm glad you used the word irrelevant there, because I wonder if Hong Kong now is slightly becoming irrelevant to China. I mean, 20 years ago, Hong Kong accounted for 16% of China's GDP. Today, it accounts for only 3% of China's GDP. Do you think that Hong Kong is becoming irrelevant to China in some ways?
Well, you're right. I mean, figures I've got, is at the time of the handover in 1993, Hong Kong was 20% of the size of the Chinese economy, and today it's 2.9%. So really, Hong Kong is, for China, relatively economically insignificant. And one of the problems in Hong Kong has been, the population, the governance system and so on is wedded to an era which has now come to an end, and it needs to move on. It needs to reinvent the economy. I mean, just compare Shenzhen, just over the border, with Hong Kong. Shenzhen is dynamic. It's home to some of the best Chinese companies, Huawei, Tencent, BYD, and so on. Hong Kong, what does Hong Kong do? Property, tourism...
Martin, I'm afraid we are running out of time. Absolutely fascinating analysis there on China and Hong Kong's relationship. Martin Jacques in London. Thank you so much.